Welcome, one and all, to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex Midas. I am joined each and every week by my co-host, Jacob Negro, where we talk about everything related to competitive Magic and how you can qualify for the Pro Tour. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do so is over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. At the moment, we have one tier that's $1 a month, and for that, you get access to all of our exclusive content. For all of our patrons who have supported us thus far, on behalf of Jacob and I would like to thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us also over on YouTube, that would be much appreciated. Of course, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the podcast. Okay, Jacob, did you play any Magic this weekend?
Yeah, I played a few play-ins. They were best of one Strixhaven sealed, and got myself qualified, I think, on my second attempt.
Okay.
With a pretty kind of unique, I think, blue-black deck, which is not, a supported color pair, but still kind of a converged deck, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, it was a deck that as I built it, I thought would be pretty strong because I've actually played a lot of sealed in this format, given the directs already. And my best run in that sealed event was punting a box away with a blue-black control deck that honestly was not very similar to this one. But, when you think of a blue-black deck and the cards in this format, it's a bunch of divinations and removal. So,
sure. And a couple ways to win, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe splashed bombs. Well, so this weekend we have it's an Arena Qualifier weekend, and it's sealed on day one, and then is it sealed day two or is it draft day two?
It's sealed day two on the qualifier weekends. New
sealed all the way through.
Yep.
It's funny, I played in so many of the Arena directs that I was a little burnt out on sealed, decided to just do some drafts and whatnot. So I actually have not enough qualifier points yet, but I have like 18 or something. And you can get these qualifier points for these weekends by just playing regular events on Arena. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, it's a new thing to me. I did not know that. So that's pretty cool.
I don't know how long it's been around, but there's basically, if you just like queue up on Arena, there's these things called standard event. I think they have one for like historic and maybe even pioneer.
Okay.
And you play 5 matches regardless of win rate, and if you go exactly 5-0, you get a small amount of QPs. So it's a bit of a grind. It would be hard to get 20 that way, but if you already have some, like I do, I just plan on grinding a couple of those out. Trying out Constructed. I played a little with Landfall, which hadn't really played that deck at all, and so I spent some matches and
nice.
So handful of hours playing Landfall.
The plans are not, they're a pretty easy way to get into these qualifier weekends, I'll say too. Even though I took a second attempt, I profited gems on the first attempt, so I didn't even lose gems. And when you get the 20 play-in points, like an Arena Direct or something, it doesn't like eat your gems. Like I got, an extra 100, I got like 150% of my gems back plus the 20 qualifier points. So
yeah, and these events, they're not as they're not like the ladder, where you can just get in and jam a game really quickly, but they're pretty low cost entry fee.
Yeah.
And they pay out pretty well. Like you get packs and gems back pretty easily. And again, you don't get eliminated ever, so you can lose twice and then still win 3 rounds in a row and get more than your gems back. So that's pretty nice.
Nice.
Yeah, so those are cool events. And funny enough, I feel like you play against a different crowd of people than the ladder. You play against less people who are trying new things, and you play against more.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you're signing up for that event, you're kind of a more competitive player, I'd imagine.
Although sometimes I do play against people who also, this is just an Arena thing, but in these events, I play against people who I would never play against on the ladder because they're playing like mono white life gain or something,
Oh, okay.
They just happen to join.
Yeah,
so that does happen. But I would say overall, I don't know if the competition's harder, because if you're in high mythic, the competition can be pretty hard, but it's more so like people are playing more established decks and decks they would take to tournaments, that sort of thing. So yeah, those are interesting. We've also got RC Cincinnati this weekend. So RC Cincinnati this weekend, and then RCDC in a couple weekends. You're not going to either of these RCs, right?
No.
Yeah.
I believe they feed the PTM qualified for. Not that that's the only reason to play these, but yeah, I'm not going with my
Gotcha.
new
Do you
child either.
ever play the RCs just like even if you're qualified?
Yeah, I did. I played the modern one in Vegas last November.
But Vegas isn't terribly far from where you live.
Yeah, it was more just, playing a big tournament in Vegas. This is kind of I guess, a fun fact about me, but I don't like flying to events that much. I pretty much only do it for PTs. I guess I flew to Vegas, but it's a little different when it's close. I guess I don't, I only take like direct flights out of Albuquerque, which doesn't have many options for Magic tournaments, is maybe my new rule. And in general, I've counted this up. I've flown to more pro tours than I have other events. Like a lot of the Grand Prix I've played in my life are like Denver, Dallas, Vegas, Phoenix, because I could drive to them.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you're talking about Grand Prix and RCs and stuff, they're not really like positive EV to fly to, even if you're an excellent player. So it's kind of just.
I mean, I felt so.
It's like you're paying a cost to play them.
Yeah, the only RC I've qualified at, I drove to anyways, is in Denver.
Okay, well there you go. Yeah. So like, for instance, I am qualified for this RC, but I just decided not to go because it's just kind of expensive, and I'd rather play just arena tournaments or whatever.
Yeah, there's also a Arena Direct this weekend as well for play boosters, I believe.
Yeah, so for all these reasons, we're doing kind of a split episode today. We're going to talk about a little bit about standard. We're not really going to talk about like, what deck you should switch to or whatever, because I know people have their decks locked in by now who are actually going to the RC. But we're going to talk about like the main decks and maybe some card choices, or like whether you'd play green landfall or green white landfall or certain sideboard cards, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few interesting tournaments last weekend with really weird results. So
right, some like a Japanese Korean tournament, right? Which as an example,
and a lot of the series in London.
Yeah, and a lot of the time when events are outside the US, you do get a slightly different variety of decks. I think different countries or people from different countries have different tendencies when they are playing Magic to play, for whatever reason, different sorts of decks. So that's another topic for another day, maybe. But yeah, so some stuff to talk about with standard, and then after that, we're going to be doing a sealed pool deck build live. So it's going to be a little easier to follow along if you're watching the YouTube video, but we'll do our best to explain the cards we're putting in our deck and whatnot. And this way we can hopefully help people this weekend for any of the tournaments they're playing, whether it be on Arena or at the RC.
Yeah. And I just sent you a couple links of those two tournaments we just discussed. So
okay.
Good places to start. I also, I don't want anybody to hard audible decks from things I'm going to say, but I do have some opinions about decks I think are much stronger right now. If you're still waffling by the time you hear this, I know some people, lock in their deck at the last second.
Yeah, still waffling, or even if you're not waffling, but you just sort of want to know what's going on and where you're positioned and what you should be focused on beating, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So which of these events do you want to look at first, Jacob?
We can look at either one. I mean, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just pulling them up.
There's also, while we're waiting, there's some pretty interesting, I think, both results and even metagame breakdowns. I didn't see this this RC metagame breakdown, but the Spotlight series in London was still a bunch of Is It Prowess, a bunch of green-white landfall, hardly any mono-green landfall. So I feel like things have kind of weirdly changed a lot, even though it mostly just sounds like green-white landfall and mono-green landfall switched. And I guess to make that clear, I don't think green-white landfall is a very resilient deck in the same way that mono-green is. I think mono-green is just, like very hard to interact with, and stuff like Esper Origins and Ice Till and Sapling Nursery just go such a long way. And the green-white deck is just like a fast landfall beatdown deck. Like, it doesn't have the card Tifa, and I'm not suggesting it should because I don't think that card's good, but it's kind of like a Tifa deck. Like, it's very all in, which, my philosophy on playing mono green landfall is that it's worse matchups or decks that are faster than it. So it makes sense that it did so well at the Pro Tour, because I do believe it's just going to be favored into the mono green version. But I'm not sure I'm a big believer in it. As I already seeing the format change, I'm not sure it looks that good to me.
It's interesting you say that, because I essentially came to that same conclusion, where the place I started when I played some standard this weekend is the green-white landfall deck, and it seemed like remarkably fine. It seemed like it was able to be attacked decently well by all the things my opponent was doing against me.
Yeah, and they probably picked, a good angle against prowess. I mean, even Erode is really good against Eddie Merc Crab, and people's prowess game plans are usually to Sunderflock you. But, like, I could see prowess players changing their plans and having a plan that's good against green-white landfall, whereas I just don't think they're going to have, like, a plan that's reliably good against mono-green. Like, sure, the Sunderflock plan works sometimes, but sometimes it just doesn't align well with their draw anyways.
Yeah, our road in particular was a big example for me, where it just wasn't very good for me in the games. Like, I played a couple mirror matches against green white or mono green, and a road was pretty nice there. But there's like these control decks popping up. They seem to have gotten a little better. Not saying that they're still good per se. And then the prowess decks, a road has its spots, like you said, against the big creatures, but it's not always what those matchups are about. So I do think the mono green just by itself is probably a little better. So then I did try some like mono green by itself, and I was liking the Esper Origins and some things about it.
The grindy tools, and I talked about my team a lot. And here's my current landfall list. For those of you at home, very similar to the Boulders list. I just cut a second sapling nursery for Bristly Bill, but I have 2 more nurseries in the sideboard, and I don't know exactly what their land count is, but my 26 lands are 14 forests, 4 escape tunnel, 4 fabled passage, 3 bossing say, and a cavern of souls. And then so just your kind of 4 main deck Melody Strider's Resolves, 4 Esper Origins, the full 4 Explorer Harmonizer, 4 of everything you kind of expect, and then 1 Bristly Bill and 1 sapling nursery. Bristly Bill, I think, is maybe kind of a hedge for Selesnya Landfall to some extent. I've just have found this card to be really impressive. Every time I play Landfall, I'm just still continually shocked it's not a core part of stock Landfall lists, and I think it's, Mossborn Hydra is an elemental. It doesn't get Requiting Hexed. There are some cool things about it, but Bristly Bill is just a cheaper card. It is pretty fast. There's actually just like a super simple turn 3 kill with Bristly Bill, which might be a turn 3 chump block, to be fair, but in the Landfall Mirror, abyssing your opponent this fast matters. The simple kill is you play a Lantern Elf, you play Bristly Bill, you play a land, not even a fetched land, put a counter on your bill, 3/3, and then next turn you Warp Harmonizer and you play Escape Tunnel or Fabled Passage, and you stack your triggers and attack for 20.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Which is like turn 1, to be clear, if you have Elf into Mossborn Hydra into Mightform Harmonizer land drop, it's only 16.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, just something a little faster, and I also think it can be a really threatening top deck with the counters from Earthbender, Ascension, and Chocobo already existing. Sometimes you just play it, trigger Landfall sometimes, and activate it. And it's also very lethal in those spots. Whereas, a top deck Mossborn Hydra can only be kind of looming to be lethal.
Mm-hmm. I knew you liked this card because we've talked about it before, and I know one of the big parts you like it is because it's just 2 mana, and so it's a nice cheap card to throw in your deck. How much of that, of you only playing 1, is because it's legendary?
A lot of it is because it's legendary. I've played 2 at times, but I do think you really can't afford to draw 2, and it does require some setup sometimes. I don't want to always be forced to just jam it on turn 2 or whatever. You have to sometimes when you play it, of course, but it can just get Burst Lightning or even Melody Strider's Resolved kind of easily. I mean, to be fair, I think the Hydra can too. That's why people don't main deck it. But, it's less of a blowout when that happens to Bill. And, I think more so when you can play it plus a fetch land or something all in the same turn, that allows you to play around Burst Lightning, or just say, I'm just going to distribute some counters on things that can attack this turn anyways. So I just don't want to have it get kind of clogged up in my hand. Same thing with 1 Nursery in the main deck. I think it's a really powerful tool to have, and then there's some matchups you really want it. And in a version with 4 Esper Origins, I just also think you actually do see a lot of cards, and these 1-ofs are going to like come up and be high impact in general.
Mm-hmm. Can you maybe articulate a bit why you're so adverse to playing multiples of this legendary when decks in the past, some decks will play like four of a legendary, they'll play like four Fiend or four Thalia or four of our Is It friend who is banned VV. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's to be more clear. I mean, I think all the four ofs in my deck are better than the two one ofs to start. So, if I could just play like a fifth harmonizer and a fifth chocobo or whatever, those would be things I would do, right? And the Bristly Bill is kind of a fifth chocobo, and I think it does something unique. It doesn't make it better on average. Some games it'll be better, but I think it's mostly just like it's already kind of fulfilling not like a major role of the deck, whereas Rafine and VV and Thalia, I think, are kind of what decks are built around doing. And even though, I mean, this card does the landfall thing very well, it's not like a Bristly Bill deck, right?
right. So I guess in this case, like the second and third copies, while they might be good, since they are for worse than the first one, you'd rather play other copies of other cards that you also think are good.
Yeah, and something kind of cool about both it and Sapling Nursery, Sapling Nursery can be pretty clunky, but there comes a point in the game where it's not clunky and it costs 2 mana. And I like that Bristly Bill and Sapling Nursery on kind of turns, maybe 5 or later, can be like these 2 mana plays that are really threatening. And it's kind of ends up being good against counter magic, even though like Nursery, if it costs you 4 mana, is pretty bad into counter magic. Sometimes you just like wait a turn, do some setup, get some lands into play, and all of a sudden you're able to play a Nursery. Your opponent says, "Oh, I'm going to get out that," and you play like a Harmonizer and kill them.
Yeah. So do you think if people are like waffling between the different versions of Landfall that this is definitely the way to go for this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're confident in your plans with a version like green white, that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't really see a good reason to play I guess, like the edge rovers right now. I mean, they're pretty good with the resolves, but I think that prowess is kind of on a decline. I want access to nurseries. I think really badly right now, though, which is a strike against the green white deck because it can't really play nursery. It's so has multiple planes, a bunch of Hushwood Verges. I think you could play nursery if you just like splash a road off some Temple Gardens and one planes, but even that one planes you fetch frequently gets in the way of your nursery still. So I think nursery is just going to be really impactful this weekend because there's just actually a lot of control popping up recently, and I know that's kind of a nightmare card for them. And to be clear, this list, even though I only have one main, I would fit in like 2 or 3 more nurseries in the board. Stuff like Surak. I like having like 3 Soul Guide Lanterns in this deck. Right now, I usually play 3 Soul Guide and 1 Keen-Eyed. And then some mix of weird disenchants. You could play literally, I don't think it's even that crazy to play like 1 of each of 3 different ones, which is like Paw Patch Formation, Glorious Decay, Origin of Metal Bending. That gives you like 2 artifact answers and 2 enchantments answers in your sideboard in a roundabout way, which is kind of cool. But also 2 plummets for Wan Shi Tong, at least the instant speed for the deal 4, or deal 4 is probably going to get it a lot of the time anyways.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I was going to say make sure you in the sideboard. One of the things I wanted to hammer on is I think people are going to have Wan Shi Tongs against you. So that'll be good. I think that's when I was building some control decks already. I was like, well, I'm gonna put some One Tongues on my mainer side.
then yeah, like I have a Snakeskin Veil. The Snakeskin Veil and Origin of Metal Bending can kind of also do some overlap. I kind of just like sideboarding like that. The Hydras are pretty good in these landfall mirrors. They're also I think kind of good against Spellmentals, because they're just like not actually that heavy on interaction for it all the time. You can protect it. It's just really threatening really fast. It forces them to have a reactive hand and not like a digging hand or a setup hand as much. If their whole game plan is just fast Sunderflock, the Hydras are going to kind of flip that on the other side. Esper Origins does a good job of that as well. I think Esper Origins is also just well positioned. Basically, there's a lot of get out right now, and so it's kind of nice to have a high impact threat that is not a creature and enchantment, and there's nothing better than Esper Origins, basically. In addition to that, just a 2-for-1 against counter magic. I've like this Cavern of Souls. I like that you can name Insect for your top end things, Explorer and Mightform Harmonizer. those are pretty high impact. Because the thing is, like, all these decks with counter spells aren't just like a big stack of counter spells that counter a spell every turn of the game. And what ends up happening is they pass with Get Out or Flash Freeze or something. And if you can just like resolve a spell on that turn, it's really disastrous for them because often they had no other plan.
Especially if it's one of the Izzet decks, they don't often have, like consult the start charts to back it up or something, which the control decks sometimes do.
Yeah, so like my team played 3 Syrax in their sideboard, and Handshake played a 1/1 Cavern of Souls split, and I've kind of met in the middle with a main deck Cavern and 2 sideboard Syrax to kind of just punish those turns.
Yeah. And yeah, I liked what you're saying about the elementals and Sunderflock. You can play in such a way where, honestly, the Mossborn Hydra, I bet a lot of games you could play that, get it down, and crack a couple fetches if you could set that up, or maybe have a fetch land that's a land creature from one of your earthbending cards, and you can make it so like the only way they could possibly answer it is with a bounce spell.
Yeah, Prismari Charm. Yeah, keep
Since burn can't touch it in the Sunderflock.
Yeah, and I mean you're gonna be playing open deck lists at the RC, so keep in mind a lot of these prowess players do the Sunderflock plan, and I think you should really believe that's if they have it in their sideboard, they're just gonna do it against you, I think. And that makes potentially Mossborn Hydra good into the prowess players. It makes things like Soul Guide Lantern better because they really need to stick a crab. So, in the sense, Soul Guide Lantern's also stopping Sunderflock.
Yeah, and specifically, it could be kind of the thing where maybe it's not good against their game 1 configuration, but it would be good against their game 2 configuration if you see that. So you could board it in, but not play it in your main deck, which is your list right here doesn't have any main. Yeah, in terms of like playing the green-white deck, there is one benefit to doing it, where as I just noticed today on Twitter that Nathan Stoyer posted a full breakdown and sideboarding guide and update to his green-white deck. And so honestly, if you're already pretty locked in on green-white and I haven't read it or anything because you have to purchase it. I think it's like $20. But honestly, if I was playing green-white, like if I was set on green-white, I would definitely be buying that and reading through it. I'm sure you could learn something from him.
Yeah, I have another archetype, not deck list, that I would recommend to people this weekend or encourage if you're already considering it. And it's one that you expressed interest in already.
All right.
Which is Ray Zhang's lessons list.
Okay.
And I have kind of some beliefs behind it, which is I just think lessons is like weirdly, maybe not weirdly at this point, we're used to it, but it's just really good at being proactive game 1 and kind of just doing its thing, and its thing is actually quite fast and effective, and my teammates called it dredge almost, and I think like the best description they had of it, which I kind of really agree with, is that you're playing like a dredge deck game 1, which, to be clear, if you haven't played against modern dredge, is just like a deck with a really high game 1 win percentage, because you're interacting on an access that nobody's main decking interaction for, especially right now. There's not really a lot of hate for Talent Monument or your graveyard in the main deck. And then post board, you have to get kind of creative, and you change into just like a blue-red control deck that is trying to be, zigging and zagging around your opponents.
For what it's worth, if you're going to do that, it's good to have a plan in your sideboard, whether it be Ral, Crackling Wit, Quantum Riddler, or I saw some of Meredith's Ideation. I actually haven't got a chance to try that, but it sounds okay to me.
Yeah, or, Ray had main deck Boomerang Basics. Was it 2? Like, was this exactly their list?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so 2 main deck Boomerang Basics and a third in the sideboard with 2 talents. And, that's also kind of a change in plan. The Boomerang Basics can generate lethal with a monument, but besides that, they're mostly just trying to bounce the opponent's thing. I think that's pretty like on theme for game 1 of the lessons deck anyways. I've always thought it was kind of weird that people get kind of weird about Boomerang Basics. It helps add consult the star charts because you've added more 2-for-1s into your deck. But I think like if there was a lesson that was just fog, the lessons deck would play like 4 in their main deck and board them out all the time, as an example. It is totally happy to go down a card to extend the game.
Yeah. That makes sense when you have this powerful engine, especially when it's
a lesson is what matters. Because also, obviously, the lesson is powering up your card advantage and mana reduction. So,
of course, yeah. Well, certainly, if I was going to this RC, and I did sort of consider it, this is probably what I would play. But that's, that has to do with both my familiarity with the deck plus like my own bias, where all my career I've mostly just played blue decks, and those are the only decks that I've kind of felt super comfortable in my expertise with. And I tend to not do as well when I play other things, and I've never really taken the time to learn like aggressive decks that well, that sort of thing. So I would be biased, but this is certainly what I would take.
Yeah, and then the reason I also kind of encourage this deck is I've been playing my own Lessons Brew on the ladder a bit, which is tablet Jeskai Rev Lessons, kind of over Artist Talent and Monument.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't recommend that deck. It's just kind of for fun for me. But the Lessons core just feels really well positioned, and I'm losing post-board games to things like Flash Freeze and Disdainful Stroke that don't matter against normal Lessons. And, just like, I feel like I'm just nerfing myself. If there was a world where Monument and Talent were really under attack, then maybe that's where you could look at Tablet Lessons. So Tablet has, similar issues to Monument anyways. That being said, yeah, I just think Monument Talent is kind of the way to go. And I don't know, when you just play Grand on turn one some games and your opponent doesn't have the answer, which is happening a lot right now, I think even these blue-red decks only play like 4 or 5 answers, and they're in this really tough squeeze where those answers don't do anything against the rest of your deck. And you sometimes play Grand on turn 5 into their 1 burst lightning mana, and you still get like 3 mana out of your Grand that turn.
Yeah, so it makes sideboarding really hard.
Yeah.
I will say, so I played this exact deck right after the PT bit, really liked it. To be fair, this weekend, my more, when I played a bunch of standard, I actually was just playing Landfall and trying to learn that deck. So I don't have any like solid updates on this deck, but I think there's some things you could consider. Like, I don't think this list is perfect. Obviously, you want to keep the core of it, but there's some flex spots, I would say. Like this Spell Pierce, or maybe the second 3 steps ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the card I really wish this deck had more copies of is Abandoned Attachments. I always hear great things about that. I do think the Quench 3 steps instant speed kind of build is what is well positioned right now compared to main deck Storm Chasers, though. I do like that currently.
I do like that too, yeah. I could see like playing maybe only 2 Consult to fit in more Abandoned Attachments, for example.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Like maybe just like -1 Consult and -1 like one of these counter spells, or even a Boomerang Basics or something, and adding Abandoned Attachments. This is a thing I remember mentioning a long time ago too, is that Boomerang Basics is often a combo with Abandoned Attachments as well. Just that you're really happy to play Abandoned Attachments and discard a lesson when it's your first 2 lessons in your graveyard, or your second and third.
Right. Yeah, totally. And then in terms of the sideboard, I don't know if you want to have so many of these Flash Freezes. They are still good in the format. I could maybe
less.
2. Yeah, 1 or 2 maybe, and play some other counters.
There's some other, you could maybe change some to Essence Scatter. I like that more than Get Out in the deck with Grand and Artist Talent, just because you'll get the cost reduction often. But Get Out is Essence Scatter is pretty good against like Spelementals.
Okay. Disdainful Stroke, maybe card that comes to mind.
That's another one. Yep.
More broadside.
Yeah, you could just kind of shift them into other matchups.
I do really think the Storm Chasers talents are important. Those are basically just for the control matchups, but they're going to be really high impact in that matchup.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
and honestly, it's not even that scary to me to have them in the sideboard, because game 1, your control matchup is a little rough, weirdly, because you just have all this red removal. Sometimes you stick the Artist Talent and it doesn't get answered, and you kind of just get to filter through all the red removal. But I've found with playing Arena Ladder, where you often play against weird control decks, that game 1 has been kind of difficult for Lessons, and the post-board games are much easier, and having something like Storm Chasers Talent will be, just make it even easier for you.
Yeah, certainly the version of this deck that plays for Talent's main deck is much better against control. That's a little bit metagame dependent. I think even though control is probably going to be decently popular, you still probably want the Talents in the sideboard.
Yeah, and either way, I just would believe this deck is probably quite favored against control, even if your game 1 matchup is unfavored.
Okay, yeah, sideboard games should be good. In terms of control, I do think it's gotten a lot better, and I think it'll be popular at an RC level. So, like the versions with tablet, we can go ahead and actually go to the Japanese tournament for a little bit.
Yeah,
because
there's a lot of control, not only one, but.
Right.
Kind of completely
dominated. I didn't look at this tournament too closely. I don't know if you have, but it's certainly the deck that won we could look at.
Yep. Yeah, so
the 4-color version of
this
the tablet
version is
discovery deck.
splashing Inevitable Defeat, which, is weird with your mana. I mean, the Great Hall of the Biblioplex obviously helps a lot. I always ask myself, really, is it like really important to splash Inevitable Defeat? And then I kind of remind myself that the card that it is replacing is Get Lost. So I understand it a little bit more because Get Lost kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So,
Get Lost
I
or
don't
Road.
really like Inevitable Defeat either, but I understand why you want to rid yourself of Get Lost.
Right. Yeah.
And with the tablets, tablet 2 of that mana does work on defeat, so you are kind of discounting it. It is a catch-all. Sometimes, answering artifacts and planeswalkers. I guess Get Lost answers planeswalkers, but answering artifacts can matter.
I've played with this deck
Stuff like
before
that.
tablet and felt like the defeats really sucked and that the deck was
Yeah.
better as just 3 colors. But I will say Shahar Shanhar really likes the defeats, and that counts for something in my mind.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm wrong about them. I don't know. And
Yeah,
maybe
we
with
see-
tablets they get better.
I remember pointing out Swallowed by Leviathans actually to my teammates in combination with Tablet. Just randomly, this weird mana cost. When you play with the card Tablet, you'll realize you want to play it on turn 4 a lot, not on turn 3. And that's because you could hit a land drop, or if you probably have a land drop in hands too, so you could hit a spell. You can't hit Swallowed by Leviathans, but if you play Tablet on turn 4 more often, you can leave up Swallowed by Leviathan on that turn where you wouldn't be able to leave up 3 steps ahead.
Yeah. Or honestly, just later in the game too, if you want to leave up tablet plus 1 blue land. Let's
Yeah, exactly.
And this card's really not much worse than 3 steps ahead. In some situations, it's going to be even better.
Yeah, and then also the nice part about turn 4 Tablet is you're not messing up your ability to turn 5 Jeskai Rip anyways, so that's pretty nice.
Yeah. I guess the one thing you'd have to worry about with Leviathan is graveyard hate, but no one's really going to be boarding graveyard hit against you, I don't think. Because you have
flashback, I mean, but if you could board it out versus a deck with Rest in Peace, if you were really worried about that too.
Oh, look, this deck has its own Rest in Peace, so you might want to, when you board in your own Rest in Peace too, you might have
board those out. Yeah,
board them out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really that important to have counter spells in this deck. It's very much a tap out control deck. It just wants some kind of stack interaction because it's a good way to defend yourself.
Yeah, so the biggest problem with these decks is certainly the biggest problem was that their best way to go over the top of the format was Jeskai Revelation, but then you had a bunch of 7-drops in your deck. So I do think tablets have helped this deck a lot.
Yeah, I'm looking at these lists. Because there's another angle you can go, which my lessons list was the same way, where you're basically blue-red control and you just splash Jeskai Rev.
This is the version I tried.
Yeah, and one thing I've discovered, and I even fit it in my lessons list, is that when you build your mana like that, I think you can get away with a Hamlet, maybe just one, but
yeah,
I see this list has 2, and the 4-color lists don't get access to that, and Hamlet is obviously really important against Bossing Say for a deck like this, but also, you can name Mysterized Village or something, even if you play one, maybe you just want to answer your opponent's stuff. I guess these lists aren't super heavy on counter magic, but later in the game, maybe that's just what matters to you.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of this because I've been playing this deck and I've been playing Jeskai and I've been a little greedy. I played 2 Hamlets. For when I first started, I had one main, one side, but I was like, I'll just put them both and see if I can make it.
Yeah,
work.
I mean, I guess
they have a third side.
These lists have 26 lands and the tablets, so you could probably fit in 2. I'm thinking about my 23 lands Lessons mana base.
Yeah, that's sketchier for sure.
Yeah, where I fit in 1.
Yeah, but these decks, especially if you're more blue-red, right? You're not playing No More Lies, anything like that.
Yeah, not playing Day of Judgment. That would be a big deal.
That too, yeah. Because the Hamlet is actually quite a big deal for control. I've just been playing it in general, and it comes up a lot. Even if the big thing is naming Bossing Say, but you'll name Ankala or whatever the Lessons looting land is called.
Yeah, Agnikel. Yeah.
You'll name restless lands against opponents who have those
the Air
in
Temple.
less popular decks. Air Temple. It's a huge card because unlike Demolition Field, where you have to draw 1 copy for every copy of land you want to answer, they draw this. You could just draw 1, and it's
yeah. And Demolition Field also is horrible against Ice Till Explorer.
That's another factor for sure.
Yeah, I mean, playing 1 or 2. Also, in your stock up, consult the Star Charts deck. Lands that you name, they're usually not things that are happening really fast in a game. So it's nice that, it's just this 1 or 2 of that is incidentally built into your mana base and you find it, late in the game, which is when those lands would come up anyways.
I've been seeing a lot of Emeritus of Ideation in these sideboards because I know the team that played this deck at the PT had it, but I don't really like it that much. I think I'd rather have like I do actually like this change where they took this player who got second at this Japanese Korean tournament, took out the third for like an Unagi. I kind of think I might want like Unagis and one Shitongs instead of
Yeah, the
Emeritus.
player in third place just has 2 Unagi and no Emeritus.
Yeah, just being flash is just
Yeah.
huge because the type of matchups you'll want to bring it in, you'll really appreciate the flash aspect.
Yeah, I agree. Also, this came up in my lessons sec too. I think people board in like Disdainful Stroke against you a lot, so it's at least a little easier with flash, but also something to keep in mind. Maybe there's something that is 3 mana or things like that that you could play instead. I think people board in flash freeze against you too, so I'd keep that in mind. Maybe make sure it's not red.
Yeah, not Ral or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a snapshot on standard. There's some other decks, obviously, but those are kind of the big ones. So good luck to anyone who's going. Do you have any tips for playing in RCs in general? It's a pretty high level tournament. Some people it'll be their first RC, Jacob.
No specific tips. I mean, it's open deck lists. So just make sure, that you're paying attention. Don't take things for, granted, I guess. Like when your opponent sideboards weird cards, I feel like this happens. I've seen it a lot at RCs where people will still just do something kind of weird that you've never seen before, and just ask yourself, like, why are they doing that? Think about it. It's a weird thing to get caught off guard by,
Yeah. Especially at that level, you can assume your opponent has at least thought through and designed a plan, even if it's, you don't think it's the best plan or whatever. That sounds like good advice to me. It's a good tip. You want to move over to talking about sealed?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I figured we'd build a pool, but you said you played this weekend and you actually wanted to talk about your deck a little bit.
Yeah, so just a shortcut. I think when you open a pool of Secrets of Strixhaven sealed, you'll often find you're in one of 2 categories. You'll either be like kind of a soupy deck that is playing a lot of the Converge payoffs, maybe, or just has really good mana and can play all of it to removal. I think I said this last week. I think Potioner's Trove is the best common you can open. I think it's better than most of the uncommons you can open. It's one of the best, like, most important tools to have in a pool because it lets you splash all these things, and the life gain is really important. Then I think also you'll sometimes notice you just have a really strong 2-color pair with a really good curve, one of the supported color pairs, and you can build kind of a draft deck, something aggressive. I always like that in sealed. I think, you have to make sure your card quality is there. You don't want to just play like crappy cards. I had said this to a friend recently, but like I'd noticed, I think Antiquities on the Loose, the one white rare that makes spirits with flashback, has really high game in hand win rate on 17 lands. I keep getting that in pools, and I'm kind of like, whatever. Like, I'd rather have a bunch of 2-drops if I'm going to build a white aggro deck than open that rare. Obviously, if I already have a bunch of white 2-drops, then that rare is going to be awesome. But
yeah, your curve and your base is more important. Anytime I'm even considering an aggressive deck, I have to have like a pretty good chunk of 2-drops, like probably like 5, honestly, at least.
Yeah, and just be careful, like going all in on one powerful, expensive spell you opened. I'll point to like Moment of Reckoning. People are pretty prepared for the big, expensive spells in this format. People play Mind Rot effects. They play counter spells that can hit those big, expensive spells. I'm not saying you shouldn't play these cards, but like if you're just like, I opened Moment of Reckoning, I have to play Black-White. I don't think that way.
And especially if it's like the only thing your deck has going for it, right?
Yeah, I point to that card specifically because I think you might also think you should really go out of your way and have bad mana to play it in a soupy deck because it has such a restrictive mana cost. And I'm kind of telling you, probably don't do that.
Yeah, because you might play this game where you finally have it in one of your matches and your opponent just disdainful strokes it anyways.
You'll play a lot of games I've noticed in this format already where it's very obvious your opponent has disdainful stroke or brush off up, and every turn that they're not behind on boards, they're not going to shields down it because they know these swingy spells exist.
Yeah, especially a 7-mana one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then how'd you end up with a blue-black deck then? That's interesting. So the deck we have here is just straight blue-black with, well, not straight. You've got some splashes.
I'm splashing Snarl Song as my only not blue-black card, but I also have cards with Converge. And notably, my mana base has a black-white land and a blue-red land and 2 black-green lands in a forest. So that's 3 green sources in my lands for just a Snarl Song, which isn't really the number I'd want. But I have 2 Hydro Channelers, which can fix for Snarl Song, so I feel more comfortable about it. This pool, I think, the blue half is kind of obvious. I have Stock Up, Archmage Emeritus, Murmuring Mystic, I like the Campus Composers a lot. They're hard to answer on curve. Usually they're kind of too threatening things, especially in a removal heavy deck like this. And then I don't have my pool available, but a lot of what I paid attention to is I just do think that, 2-for-1s are nice. And I think the cost of brilliance is not always good, but when you play a lot of 1s and 2s, it is good. Like, I think it's a really strong card if you're getting the counter on turn 3.
The best blue common in Final Fantasy was
Combat Tutorial.
Combat Tutorial, which it was this card, but you didn't have to pay 2 life.
Yeah. So obviously this is worse, but I have some life gain built in, Snarl Song, Melancholic Poet. And just, as an example, my final game with this deck when I was, 5-1 and playing for the 6th win, or I don't remember if it's 7. Either way, I played Tester of the Tangential, played Cost of Brilliance, attacked for 3. Next turn, I played Landscape Painter and Melancholic Poet, and my hand was just Bitter Triumph, Dismember, Run Behind, and I killed my opponent on turn 6.
Wow, that's pretty nice.
This deck kind of looks like a blue-black control deck that could never do that, but it's still worth keeping in mind that, I kind of have an aggressively slanted curve. I played Chase Inspiration, the dive down, just because I have Murmuring Mystic and Archmage Emeritus, and they're just so high-value targets, and even the Hydro Channeler is helping me leave up Chase Inspiration. I used to be kind of lower on Hydro Channeler, but I've been playing these kind of creature-light control decks, and I find that a card like Hop to It or Pest Tokens are really annoying, and I've kind of actually gone back to liking Hydro Channeler a bit. I don't, force myself into those colors, but it is nice. Also, I had a decent amount of wizards in this deck, and I had the Mana Sculpt, and, when you pull off a mana drain, it's really good. I actually learned in the event that it counts how much mana they spent on it after I got 8 mana from my opponent flashbacking Molten Note.
Nice.
Which my deck was actually quite good at using that mana, with the 2 Campus Composers and stuff like that.
Yeah. Although, to be clear, you don't really need the wizard to play this card in sealed. I think cancel is pretty fine.
Yeah, cancel is pretty fine. And kind of the same thing, I would get, head on board and never shields down my cancel at some point.
Yeah, the Hydro Channel is interesting because I also don't think of it as a super strong card, but it fits a niche in sealed where I pretty much always play it in my blue decks. It's just a 2-mana card. You need those, and it will fix some of your spells some of the time. So
yeah, and I would say, this deck I had 5, looks like 2-mana creatures, which is just more a result of I tried to fit in all of them once I decided I was going to play all of my Cost of Brilliances. I remember a card I had, for example, was the Double Raise Dead Gain 2 life. I did not include that in this deck. That was kind of where I included Chase Inspiration instead. Also, I think if you have really powerful high impact cards worth protecting with Chase Inspiration, and I think Royal Treatment's much more obviously a card you'll play in a lot more decks. But my point is, there's just a lot. People play a lot of removal in this format. It's, very much a lot of spells decks in this format that are really heavy on removal. So when you can kind of just navigate games to bait your opponent into, they just have to answer Murmuring Mystic or Archmage on curve so often that being able to protect them is kind of a huge mana swing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And even the aggressive decks are really incentivized to play removal because a lot of the white and white-black cards have repartee. So in terms of 3 Cost of Brilliance, I will say the one thing that makes it, when you're thinking of including this card in your deck, the thing that makes it better than just a Divination, or in this case, a bad Sign in Blood, is if you have a creature in play. So having lots of 2-mana creatures is pretty important.
Yeah, when you have a creature in play, it's not exactly like a 1/1, like a 3-mana 1/1 that does that on ETB, but it's kind of the same amount of value.
Yeah, and in some cases it'll be better, right? So
yeah.
And triggers repartee too, which is obviously why it's
really good. And I put a lot of counters on my Mystic Birds and stuff like that,
Yeah, totally. But yeah, draw twos are good and sealed. So stock up, for example, is a excellent
Yeah,
card.
stock up is probably the best non-rare in the whole set, I think, concealed.
Wow. Yeah, I guess it is really good, isn't it? Divination's always been pretty decent and sealed, but stock up's just a lot better than that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. All right. Let's build a seal pool. I've got sealeddeck.tech. Is this the website you like to use?
Yeah, this
Playing
is
around with this sort of thing.
how you can import sealed pools. In fact, on Arena, you can even import your deck by saving it, and then you can save your decks in events like qualifier weekends and stuff, and then export it and bring it here because it's, I think, a more useful deck building tool.
Okay, you'll have to forgive me. I'm in control of the screen share, and I've never used this before, so I will do my best to arrange it. I kind of want to zoom in on the cards, but I both can't zoom in my. Oh, I can zoom my screen in. Okay, that'll work.
I'll be looking at my copy and switching back and forth to kind of help myself see things.
No problem. Yeah.
The first thing I would do on this pool is just click the rarity button and see what rares you have.
Okay. So we've got an improvisation capstone. That's the 5 red paradigm spell. We've got Mathemagics. That's the XX blue. Target player draws X squared cards, or 2 to the X cards, rather.
X cards, yep.
Yeah. Chromatic Critique. Molten Core Maestro. That's a 2-mana 2/2 menace with Opus. Gets a +1/+1 counter. Sky Coach Conductor. That's the 3-mana 2/3. All aboard. Has flash, and then you can pay a blue to blink something. Exhibition Tidecaller, 1 mana 0/2 with Opus. Whenever you cast instant sorcery, target player mills 3, but then if you do the big Opus ability, it's 10 cards. And then a couple good aggressive white creature or cards: Stirring Hope Singer, 3 mana 1/3 flying lifelink repartee. Pump your board, and then Practice Offense, which is the flashback spell that pumps your board.
Yeah, the Practice Offense, I would say, by the way, you can find weird spots to play that your deck is not an aggro deck. It's just, especially if you have like big trample things, you can just threaten lethal with just one thing getting double strike over a couple turns, or lifelink over a couple turns can swing the race in your favor. You definitely want big, you definitely either want to be going big or have, a normal white go wide deck. But I think if you have a plan for this card, you can often play it.
It's an insane card. Real quick as a tangent, I've noticed when I was looking at 17 lands data, I felt like I was not using it very well, and it felt like I was building worse decks by looking at it. But that being said, it is one of the best performing cards on 17 lands, Practice Offense. So I'm aware that it's really good. Stirring Hope Singer, similarly very powerful.
Anyways, this pool has an insane amount of broken blue-red cards.
Yeah, it sure does, doesn't it?
I mean, we'll talk about them while we're here, but Mathemagics has been insane for me in all these sealed pools I've played. I think the mode it starts at is often the 6-mana mode, so that's a sorcery opportunity. 6 mana draw 4. That's not the rate you're most excited about, but you're happy to get a 4-for-1 at that stage of the game. And then the 8 mana draw 8. That's kind of a last card in your hands type of thing. If you can make it to 8 mana, also really happy to just completely refill your hand. And then usually by the time you can do a 10 mana 16, it's lethal. So it's also potentially a win con in a longer game.
Yeah, what's nice about it is it's decent, I guess, against decks that are aggressive or more proactive, at least, and not like a control mirror sort of. And so you can spend your removal and then refill with this on cheap. And then in like a control matchup, it's just your best card, probably win the game if you can resolve it type of thing. Okay, so it's going to be pretty hard not to play blue-red, right, with all these just great blue-red cards.
Yeah, I mean, the Traumatic Critique is awesome. The Tidecaller, I think, is also quite good and sealed. A single mill 10 can just swing the game in your favor, or oftentimes you might be able to play it and, get like a mill 13 in the same turn, or stuff like that, and that's going to be pretty lethal. The Maestro is also just like a pretty good on-curve thing if you happen to be base red. So now I would sort it by mana value. Cool. So also I'll point out we do have a trove. I'm looking at our fixing while we sort by curve 2. We only have a white-black tap land and a black-green tap land. Kind of awkward for our blue-red core. Might make it pretty hard to splash outside of that if we wanted to be blue-red, but maybe I don't want to get attached to that. Maybe we're green blue and we can splash red cards and black cards. I guess fixing is what I would look at next. So I see environmental scientist. I see the potioner's trove. Simone's experiment is not exactly fixing. There's Snarl Song as like a powerful thing. There's Arcane Omens. It's a powerful splashable thing. The Pest Brood Sloth. I just kind of look at these big, kind of like really high impact things. I see Mind Roots. The Capstone, I imagine, is quite good. It is kind of funny that 2 of our best cards are X spells. So if we hit those, they just get exiled, which is a little awkward, I guess. But given we have the Tide Caller, I think we'd still probably deck our opponent anyways. I guess the Capstone is also awkward with Converge.
Yeah, it is.
In red specifically, anyways, too, when I'm thinking, do I need to be a blue-red base? There's not actually, I want to be able to include red cards in my deck for Critique, Abrade, Stress Dream, maybe the Maestro. I mean, Tome Blast is good, but sometimes it's not good, it depends on what kind of archetype you're playing against. So my inclination here is actually to maybe try to do the blue-green thing. Just because that's going to be the easiest way to fit in the colors. I know we have a black-white land, so I'm going to look over, we do have Ajani's Responses, Practice Defense.
Yeah, and I'm noticing we have we have a couple extremely good white cards, but we have a shockingly low number of white 2-mana cards, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And even in green-blue, we could get like a Cuboid Colonnade. If we want to play Quandrix Charm, you can. Oh, we have a Studious First Year for fixing as well. So I would.
So green's probably.
I would be looking to start by adding the stronger green and blue cards, and then I think, we might have to be kind of picky with what red cards we splash because we're just going to be playing Potioner's Trove and like a mountain, maybe 2, searching for it. But I think it's kind of a pretty powerful baseline place to start. The black splash off Titan's Grave potentially, and a swamp get us Grapple with Death and Arcane Omens at the very least.
Okay, so at the moment I'm pulling the green cards. So I'm going to pull our 2-mana green cards, our cheap mana fixing green cards, Studious First Year, Scientist. We've got a Mindful Biomancer. I mean, that's a decent 2-mana card. Potioner's Trove. A lot of the green cards are actually going to be green-blue. Do you want to look at just a green-blue base?
Yeah, I want to be green-blue based and try to splash our strongest red and black cards, which I think there's only 2 black cards I really want to splash, but that should be pretty easy with the green fixing and the Titan's Grave.
Okay, what do you think about this Follow the Lumerets card? This is look at the top 4.
No, I don't really like it that much. If I'm a dedicated Witherbloom deck, sometimes I'll fill it in, but even my ideal Witherbloom sealed deck is 16 creatures and 7 combat tricks / removal spells or something,
Okay. So you don't, I mean, it's kind of good. It kind of works with the Trove and the Biomancer, but I guess.
Yeah, but it also asks you to play a lot of creatures, I guess.
Sure. What about this Tester of the Tangential? 2-mana 1/1 increment.
Yeah, I like that card. I think that card's pretty good.
Okay. I think I'm mostly pulling all the good green and blue stuff.
Yeah, it can go down. So 1-drops, 2 of them. Yep. 2 drops. I guess I already added red cards. So Traumatic Critique.
Okay.
Math of Magics. Those are X spells. Abrade is one, maybe we can't afford the splash, but I do really like it. I like that it's a very playable card that also answers opposing Potioner's Troves. Whereas, Glorious Decay, not my favorite to run. I find the 4 damage to flying thing is totally useless in most of my games. So it's either Cycle or Destroy an Artifact, which is a lot worse.
Yeah. So the only obvious red cards I've pulled are Traumatic Critique, Stress Stream, and Abrade. There's obviously the Capstone, but that's a double red, so that's a lot more of a commitment.
Yeah, and we have a lot of really good expensive stuff already.
So maybe I don't need it.
Yeah.
I will say if you're gonna double splash, a 7-mana card is usually okay to do so if you have a lot of fixing, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I'm thinking about is I have Studious First Year, Environmental Scientist, and Potioner's Trove. And if I play a mountain, That's going to get me to 4 red sources, which is just like not something I'd be comfortable with a double splash with. And to be honest, it's kind of a number I'm more comfortable with for maybe exactly like 2 cards. And you know, some card draw could help with that. We might end up playing this Simone's Experiment, which we can't directly search a mountain, but at least gives you a lot more looks at mountain.
Okay.
It also gives you a lot more looks at environmental scientist and studious first year, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a 4-mana stock up type deal, kind of.
Yeah, so it's a weird card, probably not that often sealed. It's 3 and a green. Look at your top 5, reveal up to 2 creatures and lands, put the lands into play tapped, and the creatures into your hand.
Okay. So
it's a weird, sometimes
that
explosive
card.
vegetation, sometimes finds creatures instead. You do kind of want to care about your creature count playing it. You're probably going to play 17 or 18 lands anyways. This deck, I'm probably aiming to only play 17 lands with, you know, the 3 things I described already being mana sources. I do think we have a bunch of big top-endy payoffs, so that's going to be fine.
Yeah. So looking at just all the obvious things that we pulled up, we only have 17 cards. So we're either going to have to add another color or start thinking about some of these lesser writing cards.
I definitely want to play Grapple with Death and Arcane Omens in the Swamp.
Okay, gotcha.
And
Grapple
Titan's
Death, and we also have Titan's Grave.
Yeah,
Green black
and
tap land.
I don't really want to add more black cards than that. I want to kind of stop there, but
So you like Arcane Omens, right? This is, I mean, this people might know this by now that this card's really good, but I do think it's a card that doesn't look that good, at least to me. So I had to.
I would play Arcane Omens and Sealed if I was a 3-color deck that could never even get 4.
Okay,
that's how good I think it is.
Like, yeah, a little bit of that is this particular format.
Yeah, right? People just have like what you'll find too is sometimes they get empty-handed and then they play like a card draw spell and then you get cards again.
And you're like, ooh,
you know, yeah,
yeah. Okay. We do have some good red cards, I guess, if we were to do the blue red, but I guess they're all.
Yeah, we have some removal, which.
Well, I like all these like red 5-drops, but.
Yeah, that is one thing definitely maybe drawing me into looking at blue red again. It's just a little awkward because I think if we're playing blue red, we're not playing any 3rd color whatsoever.
Probably not.
It is a little weird that we've hit kind of a cap on. Not a full cap on playables. There's some things we can include. I don't mind the Shopkeeper's Bane, to be honest.
This is the 3-mana 4/2 trample when attacks gain 2.
Yeah. I find that often just kind of trades with a reasonable card and gains you 2 life.
Yeah, and if you have a draw, we're not going to have a ton of removal in this deck, but if you have a draw with removal, you can really hammer them with that thing.
Yeah. The Mindful Biomancer, not a disaster of a card to play. I'd be careful playing a lot of copies of them because it has this weird kind of like diminishing returns.
Yeah. What about this Tenured Concoctor? Do you like this in this format at all?
Yeah, I do. I love that card. I would definitely play it.
Okay. Definitely the kind of card where, you know, it's pretty matchup dependent of how good it's going to be, but I guess at the worst case, just a big 5-drop is not the worst.
Yeah. I mean, our black fixing should be kind of good, and just like I do think what we might have to end up doing is playing more black cards.
Our choices are like
card quality.
End of the Hunt, which is that edict that gets their highest CMC thing.
I like that card. I just totally forgot its name. Yeah, okay. I would play that.
Yeah, it's a pretty premium removal spell. It's not very often that your opponent that their best thing in play is not also their most expensive thing. So just works out nicely. You kill what you want, or at the very least, you kill something that costs a lot more than what you spend on it. So, I mean, this does get us to 22.
Yeah, let me see. Sorry, also, did you already add Titan's Grave? Is that why it's 22? It says it's actually 21. Sorry, it's hard for me to see the numbers.
I did add Titan's Grave.
So we have 21.
We have 22. We have 23 plus Titan's Grave.
Okay, so you have something I don't have. Let me see.
I see you have this already on your screen.
Yeah.
Is it the Abrade?
No, I have the Abrade. If you sort by manic value, I have like... Oh. Yeah, so I have 2 1s. I have 7 2s. Is that what you have? You have 6 2s.
If I include Abrade, yeah.
Okay, 7 2s. And then at the top of the curve, and 2 4s. Is that what we both have?
I can just read off what I have so far for the deck. So in the 1-drop slot, we got one Studious First Year, 1 Exhibition Tidecaller. In the 2-drop slot, we have Cuboid Colony. That's the 2-mana 1/1 flash with Increment. We've got Quandrix Charm, Abrade, End of the Hunt, Mindful Biomancer. That's just the 2-mana 2/2 that gains life, and you can pay 3 to pump it. Environmental Scientist and Tester of the Tangential. The 3-mana slot, we have Shoekeeper's Bane, Potioner's Trove, and Sky Coach Conductor. 4-mana slot, we have Pest Brood Sloth and Brush Off, and also Zimone's Experiment.
I didn't add the experiment. That's what happened. Okay.
Perfect.
But good. Yeah.
We don't have to play that, but this is what we have right now. And then at the 5-drop slot, we have Arcane Omens, Tenured Conductor, and Stress Stream. And then 6-drop slot, we have Snarl Song. X spells, we have Traumatic Critique and Math Magics. And actually, we also have another 3-drop, which is Grapple with Death.
Yep. Okay.
So you're comfortable splashing 2 colors then? Like 2
and
colors?
expect, we have Snarl Song and Arcane Omens, right? So like we want access to a decent number of colors.
So the Converge there being a big part of it. Potioner's Trove is going to be our best fixer then by far.
I think playing Plains is going to be kind of tough, but at least the Trove can get us white some games. I probably would not play Plains at all. And I think Snarl Song you want 4 colors for. Like I said, Arcane Omens, if it's 3 colors, it's kind of fine. I kind of want to splash the Mind Roots.
That's interesting you say that because I just haven't really been playing this card. I just didn't think it was that good. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of like the Mind Roddy type stuff in this format. I think
even off a splash, huh?
Yeah.
Can't play it early for the ramp aspect some of the time.
Well, I mean, a lot of our sources, we have Environmental Scientist and Studious First Year, like.
So you can get the black early.
Yeah. Or even the Trove is also somewhat early, right?
Yeah, that's true. You'd play that over something like Last Grasp or Last Gasp?
Maybe we need the Last Gasp because maybe we just need more interaction. That could be better.
We do have a lot. We do have a lot of like card advantage. Expensive card advantage. Kind of think maybe a cheap interaction.
Yeah, we could splash Last Gasp. That's probably totally fine.
Got him.
Yeah, the other thing I've thought about is like this Wild Hypothesis just for the Tidecaller, but I think it's a little too bad of a card.
Yeah, I've tried playing this card, and some of the time when you draw it with your, combos really late in the game, it can be nice. But the games where you just kind of have to play it on curve, you're pretty up.
Yeah, I mean, we have 5 big Opus spells already. That's probably plenty.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, what I just read off plus the Last Gasp, I think that's going to be our deck. There's really nothing. There's just not enough in blue-red, right?
Yeah, I mean, so, if you're playing best of 3, you could keep in mind, if you're against an aggro deck, maybe you should switch to blue-red. You get double Tome Blast. I like Rebel Rouser. You could also, these artistic processes. You could just play towards your capstone.
Especially if your opponent's deck like goes wide and small, there's a lot of answers here.
Yeah, so you probably, if you play against one of those streamlined kind of white aggro decks, you might just want to switch to blue-red. But I just think what happens the most is you play these kind of soupy mirrors, and I think this deck has the tools to win those mirrors. The Tidecaller, the Mathemagics being the huge ones.
Yeah.
Arcane Omens as well. Those are like the 3 big mirror winners in my mind in those spots.
I did just notice that we have the Rancorous Archaic. Is that better than the Tenured Concoctor?
No, I think I like Tenured Concoctor more as a card, even if I was making a 7/7 with the Archaic. I just think these types of 5-drops will get sniped by removal often enough that the 2-for-1 aspect's pretty good.
Yeah, I've liked the Concoctor. It doesn't have I feel like the win percentage on it when I look at 17 lands isn't great, but that's another example of me liking the card and then looking at 17 lands and then stopping to play it, and then my opponents play against me and it's really good, and I'm just like, okay, well, I'm going to start playing with that card again.
Yeah.
Everyone just has so much removal. It ends up being nice.
Yeah, as a last slot, I mean, I'm looking at Mindful Biomancer or Zimone's Experiment or, the Graphaloon. If your opponent had some more Flyers type stuff, you could keep that in mind as a sideboard option too. Yeah. Glorious Decay as well. Whichever of these you main deck, just keep in mind, that, you should be ready to side it out for the ones that make sense. You could also, versus a less aggressive deck, board out your Last Gasp for Mind Roots or stuff like that too.
Yeah. No, totally. That makes sense. So let's go ahead and build the mana base. I assume you're liking 17 lands in this list.
Yeah, and you want a little bit of bias towards green. I like that we really don't care that much about double blue till we get to Mathemagics.
If we didn't have these cards that like were lands or went to go fetch lands, would you play 18? Like if we didn't have the environmental scientist or the
I think I would,
year.
especially because I already kind of have a crappy last card. So that last card might be Zamone's Experiment, which to some extent is going to help with our mana as well, especially our big X spells. But I don't know what the math is on like 17 lands plus 9 creatures. I mean, let me pull it up really quick. So this would be 23 hits, and let's say we don't really care what we hit. We just want to make sure we're getting a 2-for-1.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because hitting lands is like pretty good. So the way like I always plug this in is just a big average, but like I'm going to put a population size of 39 because we know one of the cards is the Zamone's Experiment.
Yeah, and he's using a hypergeometric calculator.
Yep. And then we'll do a sample size of 5, and then the successes in our 39 cards are 17 lands and 9 creatures, so that's 26. And we want 2 successes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a 96.5% chance on average. Obviously, the number will never be exactly that because the game, has changed what that is, and you never actually have 39 cards in your deck when you cast it. But that gives you an average. That's the middle of your bell curve, effectively, is what I've calculated there. So,
so that's good enough.
It's probably pretty good. Yeah. And then we just won't play the Biomancer because it's kind of weak. And a lot of our creatures are pretty good. It's like the whole game too. So that's pretty nice.
I guess I never really thought about how many creatures we have. I guess we have plenty though. 1, 2.
I'm really like this deck. I'm not very scared of not winning the game. We have.
Okay. Well, it's more just like you need some creatures to produce like virtual card advantage against your opponent's creatures, that sort of thing. Because this is Zamone's Experiment. I don't think it's a great card. So like maybe we can play a 4-drop instead of it, but I think it's fine. We've got enough.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely need some things to kind of defend yourself.
We've got the Pest-Brood Sloth. That's a pretty big one. We've got some 2-drops. That's all pretty nice. So in terms of the mana base, we have fixing that fetches for basics. So we definitely need to play a mountain and a swamp. Are you happy with just playing one mountain? The swamp, we kind of have 2 lands that tap for black because we have Titan's Grave, but we don't have a dual land for red.
Yeah, I'm currently happy with 1 mountain, 1 swamp.
Okay. So this gives us 4 red sources essentially.
Yeah, for 3 cards, which is not exactly what I'm comfortable with, but I'll give some credit to Zamone's Experiment finding Mountain Scientist and Studious First Year. Is kind of how I'm thinking about it. And
they are all like spells that can be good into the late game too. So if it takes us a while to find the red source,
exactly,
it should still be good when we cast them. And then so that gives us our 3 lands. We need 14 more. Presumably those are all going to be islands and forests.
Yeah. So then I know I really want to be able to cast my First Year and my Environmental Scientist. So I'm aiming, if possible, to get 9 green sources just in my land alone, which would involve adding 8 forests, which then leaves 7 lands left, which would be 7 islands potentially.
I think it's 6. Only 6.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Are you comfortable with only 6 islands? So that's 6, and then the green, if you have the green sources in the Trove, I mean, that's kind of like 9, but obviously you have some cheaper blue stuff with Quandra Charm and Cuboid Colony that really want to come down early.
I'd probably cut Forest for an island.
Okay. It is,
You have the Trove, counting for both. Like the Trove is never a thing you have to make a decision on, like the Scientist in the First Year, right? Like,
yeah.
When you draw the Trove, you're just going to have perfect mana with this deck. But it's like totally fine for the Trove to be your first green or first blue source is kind of the point I'm getting at.
So I'm cutting a forest. This is how I have to cut it. Okay. So only 8 green. I mean, that seems a little low, maybe. Maybe 9 is better. 7 blue. 6 blue feels a little low. Brush off is
7 blue. Well, it's 7 blue with Scientist First Year and Trove, right? I mean, that.
Yeah. No, I don't think 7. Yeah, I think this is like the higher end of blue. I'm just seeing if we could get away with 6.
Cool. And we got the deck done.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is the deck. Obviously, you can take a look if you're watching the video. If not, we did end up going with 8 green, so 7 forests and the Titan's Grave.
This is not like a 10 out of 10 to me, but I'm pretty happy with it. I got this pool,
nice.
I think
Yeah.
Play
above average.
Yeah, I'd mentioned I think, you can get these soupy decks, but like the big three here to me, I know the Traumatic Critique is also kind of good, but what will happen with that most of the time is you just 2-for-1 a creature. I don't think you'll
That's true.
kill your opponent with it that often. You will sometimes, but the Arcane Omens, Mathemagics, and Tidecaller are like the big three things in this deck to me that are like these are gonna kind of just like I know that Arcane Omens doesn't literally win the game, but it'll steal the game in a way that does effectively win the game a lot of the time, where you just get 4 of your opponent's cards.
Yeah, I mean, Snarl Song 2 against the aggressive decks is going to be one of your best cards. But in terms of, the control matchups, one of the problems with building a deck like this is sometimes if you don't get enough high-end or like late-game stuff, you just lose the other control decks. So you're just not actually a very good deck. But this deck has like a Brush Off, and then it has...
even a Quandrix Charm. I don't mind that either.
Yeah,
A lot of these spells are really expensive.
Yeah. A little quench action. Then, between, honestly, even just having one of these would be nice, but having both is really good. Mathemagics and Tidecaller, both of them can break the mirror match wide open. Cool.
And a lot of our threats, pretty much, our only expensive threats are Pestbreed Sloth, Tenured Concoctor, Snarl Song, all of which are 2-for-1s, stuff like that.
Yeah. Traumatic Critique. Stress Stream, boy, I love those two too. I don't think I've like not cast Stress Stream, which is kind of crazy to say, but I just never seem to have it. So that's cool to have.
I guess something, when you get pools like this, something you should keep in mind, because I don't know how good this card is in draft, to be honest. I think the rare people know about is the Wisdom, the 4 blue, return all your instant sorceries from your graveyard to your hand. Sorcery.
Right.
That card's obviously, I think people know is pretty good. But Divergent Equations, the XX blue instant that returns X instant or sorceries from your graveyard to your hand, is also very good. And that would be a premium card in this pool.
Totally. It plays really nicely with a bunch of other instants too, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah. Both of those cards are also, by the way, like the type of thing I'm talking about where like you draw Arcane Omens and your opponent's empty-handed and you think, oh darn, and then a few turns later they return 5 cards from their graveyard to your hand and tap out.
Yeah, they do that. They think they've won, and then you Arcane Omens them for 4 and you're back to square one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. For what it's worth, I would have looked at a white deck in most pools that I had these 2 really good rares, but just looking at this pool, there's just like there's just no white to be had. There's very few two mana creatures, and that's really important if you're going to build a white pool.
I mean, you get
1 mana creatures
with red or black. You get some more. You
get like 2 of them.
Yeah, I mean, you get Send in the Pest, Melancholic Poet. You have Elite Interceptor. So black's not great, and then in red, you have like 1, 2, 3, 4 cards.
Yeah.
You'd probably be. Then your red white is just really like you don't want a bunch of 5 drops when you're the red white deck. Yeah, I think it's a lot more obvious than this when like your curve is really good. I had looked at a pool of somebody recently, and it had kind of a lot of the soupy stuff I was talking about, but not like it had good fixing, but not any powerful, big, expensive spells. And I thought the way that the deck should be built, just like it was almost all 2s and 3s drops, double Giant Growth, Wither Bloom, just the like I was saying before, like it's just I think there was environmental scientists and noxious newts, so I told them to play 16 lands, but it was just literally like 17 creature spells, 2 combat tricks, and 5 murders, basically like, and I just think something like that
could win a lot of games.
Yeah, and like some of them were like Send in the Pest, or I think there was Mozio and like the Essence Scholar or whatever. So like bodies that make a pest, it's really annoying for a deck like this that doesn't have a lot of blockers.
Yeah. Basically, if you don't have good high end, it's really tough to be a control deck. You'd rather be an aggressive deck. I mean, and already pretty much, but
or even this pool, if we have this blue-red kind of option available that is maybe a little bit more aggressive, not really, but the blue-red deck, to be honest, is much more an anti-aggro deck, just kind of looking at it, than anything else.
It is. So maybe you could sideboard into that.
You'd have a really reliable, like good, you'd have the Molten Core Maestro and the Tidecaller, and you'd have like Critique Mathemagic, Stress Dream, some number of Artistic Protests, and Flashback Tone Blast. You'd be like really heavy on Opus, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd probably just play the Potioner's Trove because you need a mana accelerant.
Right.
And gaining life is nice, but you wouldn't splash anything.
You'd probably have to play one or two of these Tackle Artists just for cards.
Yeah, like if you had if we only got a white black land and a black green land, like if we had a blue green land, like then I'd be saying let's put Snarl Song in a blue red deck or something like that,
And look at that maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, really just nothing besides the Trove is really not enough to consider splashing at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Before we go, I'll just ask about some what I'm curious what you think about specific cards. What do you think of this Page Loose Leaf? Is this always unplayable or
Yeah, I think so.
At the time?
I mean, I've never really had the option to think about the Grandeur, so I don't think it's very playable without Grandeur. Just like when you think about cards like this, the big issue, I guess, is that like being an O2 matters a lot. Like if it was a 1/2, it would be a lot better. It would be threatening to block pests or things like that. But like the blue mana dork I talked about is a 1/3, which is just like that's actually defensive. And when your opponent plays 2 mana 2/2, like you're gonna gain a lot of life throughout the game with this. Whereas like Page Loose Leaf can accelerate you, but it's kind of this trade-off where sometimes you don't want a 2 mana summoning sick colorless mana rock. You just want a swamp, and like it's not obviously better than just like an 18th land in your deck to me or things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually tried it a little bit and decided it wasn't worth it, but sometimes these like 2 mana colorless artifacts nowadays are actually pretty good and sealed. Like if you're just missing 2 drops, you just throw them in. But
yeah, it'd be a lot better if it wasn't a creature. It's kind of a downside that's a 0/2 creature compared to just like an artifact creature, just a normal artifact like the Iron Crag or whatever. With no legendary creatures in your deck would be better.
I do sometimes play the other 2 mana colorless guy that's a 2/1 and gets a +1/+1 counter every time you play a multicolor spell.
Yeah,
really need 2 drops.
If I have a lot of multicolor spells, that card's also kind of nice.
Yeah, that too. It's important.
Being aggressively slanted. It also matters that they're cheap. I had a Strixhaven, or sorry, a Silver Quill deck that I played some of those.
Yeah. Artistic Process. Do you rate this as like kind of a premium card or is it like a filler?
It's filler, I think.
Okay.
Keep it in mind, sometimes the sweeper effect's really good. Decks like these might really struggle with like the card hop to it. I always mention that cards, but it is a card I've beaten people with and lost to like a decent amount of times in both sealed and draft in this format. It very much stands out to me, and it's only an uncommon. So,
okay, all right, that's interesting. I sometimes tend to overrate these like 5 mana cards. I think. Like, what do you think about Pigment Wrangler?
That card.
This is one that I think of pretty highly. And I'm wondering what you think.
The way I see it, I had mentioned how I really like that our top end is like Sloth, Concoctor, Snarl Song. And the Wrangler, I by no means think it's a bad card, but it's kind of high risk, because you really need to untap with it, basically to get any effect, both the 4/4 flying and the copy of a spell. I've played it a lot, to be clear, but I wouldn't be trying to like going out of my way too hard to play it because I do think this format and even the aggressive decks, just people are just going to play their removal. My dream, Converge soup deck has a lot of removal that could answer this guy very effectively, and my dream aggro deck has a lot of removal that could answer this guy pretty effectively. When I think about it that way, then it kind of puts it down. Same thing with like the Rancorous Archaic and why we didn't play it.
That all makes sense. I just see big 5 mana 4/4 flying in it with upside, and I just think like it seems super powerful and sealed. I knew we wouldn't play it in this deck because we weren't going to play much red, and these other splash cards make sense. But if we had Meta War red, if we were playing blue red, I probably would have built with it.
Another card you'll get in the sealed format a lot that you should keep in mind is fixing that is kind of weird is the Biblioplex. That's an extra source. I love getting it in these pools, but it's only an extra source for instants and sorceries. But like, do keep that in mind.
I've been playing that in just every deck when I open it.
Yeah, basically, I would.
Yeah.
You'd have to like, if you were an
Just
aggro deck, I guess. But even then, it's only to cost you 1 land. But I'm thinking about how it gets in the way of like, this pool has Curel and Spirit Mascot, and it doesn't cast those. But
yeah, I guess if you're really focused 2-color aggro deck, or maybe even like 2-color and 2-color and a splash, and you weren't splashing instant sorcery, you like really needed your mana to be on point, maybe you wouldn't play it. But
yeah,
just
the
the
creature
fact that it
lands
could
would
be a
be
creature land
really
is
good.
nice.
So that's what's important. But the downside is mostly only with 2-color gold cards. But there are certainly some aggro decks that have a bunch of the 2-color gold cards.
Thank you for listening to the Stock Up Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, you can support us over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. That is the best way to support us. At the moment, it's $1 a month, and you get access to all of our exclusive content that we post over there, as well as access to our Stock Up Podcast Discord, which is growing, and I think we have a lot of fun conversations over there. So go check that out. Of course, you could also follow us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe while you're there. And Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that jazz. You can listen to us there, anywhere. And we want to thank our patrons that have been with us from the start, a lot of you, and whoever has joined recently. We really do appreciate it. It means a lot. So please enjoy the rest of the episode. Stick around to the end, okay? And we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Well, nice build. That's going to do it for this one, folks. Hopefully we were able to help a little bit for any tournament you're playing over the weekend, and we'll talk to you next time.
I could kind of talk about my video I didn't publish.
Sure.
So I know
What's
I'd
going
mentioned
on with it.
Yeah, so I'd mentioned multiple times on the podcast I was going to try to record the finals, and I just had some technical issues. Took me about an hour, and then I noticed at the end that a lot of the end of the recording didn't come through. So I just kind of wanted to share some thoughts about the actual match myself. But I was really surprisingly not that disappointed, because I found that video is more just instructive and good practice for me to kind of record myself and be able to talk for an hour by myself, which I liked.
Okay. So you don't think you're going to want to post it?
I don't think I'll post it. I might, I'll continue to make it a goal to make videos like that, perhaps, or maybe just, I see,
practice.
You've been making videos with cool kind of decks that people really like those, and I've been playing just like tablet lessons or whatever, and maybe I should just do something like that. But anyways, if you didn't watch the finals of the PT, I guess there'll kind of be some spoilers, but game one, really weird. Right off the bat, so it's like, this is the green white landfall mirror, and Larson is on the play and plays like Chocobo into Cub. On turn 3, it's very obvious he needs to play Bushwhack to hit his land drop, and then play a 3-drop. And his options are Lumbering Worldwagon and Earthbender Ascension. And when I was recording this, I went and just thought about it a lot before I saw what he did. And I came to the conclusion you should play the Worldwagon. You don't even really miss out on like a counter on your Earthbender Ascension. You still get a land. You have a Cub in play, so obviously like the Earthbent land from the Ascension looks like more, but next turn you could just Earthbent and untap land. It's kind of the same. So I just think like effectively when you play both those cards, like one of them is a Worldwagon that could attack next turn, and the other one is exactly the same card this turn and next turn. And he plays Ascension, so that's really weird to me. And I also think if you played he had a road in his hand, and it's pretty early in the game, it's only turn 3 on the play. If you had played the Worldwagon, then like on the following turn, I think you threaten lethal with eroding your own Earthbent land. Like I think he was able to play like Ascension, Earthbent, or play a second Bushwhack for another land, like crew and attack with a white up, with a big Chocobo and the Worldwagon, and trigger landfall another time. So if you've been counting, that means we played Ascension, and then we got a land from it, a land from the Bushwhack, and a land from Worldwagon. So our Ascension should have 3 counters. And if we play the Erode, on an Earthbent land, it'll go to 5 counters, which means we could give trample to both the Chocobo and the World Wagon. And basically, the way that math lined up to me is that Nathan could not survive with a 1/1 chump block. So we'd have to commit something more than like an Earthbent land or land or elves. And so that never even happened. On the turn that, I feel like just looking at my hands could have generated lethal if I had played my turn 3 differently. Instead, we play World Wagon and we kind of set up. So that's turn 4, we play World Wagon. On turn 5 and 6, Christopher Larson has a deterministic lethal and misses it. And then he loses on Nathan's turn 6.
Okay.
So that was kind of crazy to watch. Not trying to slander anything. These players have played a really long tournament and they're tired and stuff like that. But
sometimes you just make mistakes at the wrong times.
One of them was like a matter. He had just drawn Harmonizer, and it was like almost, it was a very close lethal that maybe I miscounted, but I double counted it, I think. So just like could have just gone for lethal with the new Harmonizer, and then on the next turn, it's really weird. Nathan finally gets to pass with the mana up because you don't always just get to do that in the landfall mirror, and he does have a road, and he plays the Harmonizer and crews and attacks with the World Wagon, and just has the Badgermal Cub from turn 2 not attacking, and if he attacked with the Cub, he gets to do the same thing he did with the World Wagon, where he played the Harmonizer, played a land from his hand, and searches for a land and just like tramples it up, doubles its power twice. It's like 20, somewhere between 24 and 28 trample. I think it's lethal. It can't be chumped reasonably. So that forces Nathan to erode it before he even casts his own erode. And like that means it gets eroded. You search for a land, you double your Badgermal Cub Sing and give it a counter, and you erode your own land, and you do that 2 more times, and it's just still lethal. But the Cub just wasn't attacking.
Sure. Matt Nass also, I would say, almost assuredly punted 1 game and maybe punted 2.
Yep.
The second one was like more of a judgment call, I would say, whereas the first one was like pretty clearly a mistake.
Yeah, one of them he missed lethal against a tapped out opponent, I think because he forgot that Paw Patrick.
Well, he did have a wide open, so he could have had a road, but it was the kind of thing where like he would have probably eroded the Herboroid if he had it.
Right, that's what it was. Yes, there was no way he actually had a road. He did not make that play because he was playing around a road, I think.
Yeah, and also he had so many top decks that could kill him on the next turn that he probably should just, even if he thought he had a road,
it's funny,
just go through it.
Like, that's a mistake I can really understand, where it's this weird thing where like I know Paw Patrick Recruit has trample, and I also think I know Matt Nass has learned before that point in time that Paw Patrick Recruit have trample, but that's one of the easier things to forget about a Magic card.
Is like some little incidental piece of text on it.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially
it's
on
weird that like it's just the least important part of that card, and it's weird to say like I don't even want to like discredit him enough. Like I'm sure he knew it had trample at some point in that Pro Tour even.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's just like when mathing out that whole turn and looking at it, he just forgot in that instant because he was overloaded with stuff. I have a lot of things that are coming to mind right now. One is, do you think that this like landfall deck and these green creature mirrors are actually more complicated? Because we saw actually a lot of mistakes this Pro Tour. Even maybe this is observation bias, but I felt like every time I watched this stream, I was noticing a lot of mistakes from players. And it's not like, I'm any better necessarily than the players there. So like I shouldn't be noticing that many mistakes, I would think.
Yeah.
Do you think this format's like particularly complicated or something right now?
Well, I think the landfall deck, when you're doing these harmonizer mathing things, is complicated. And on the other side of the table, sometimes you should really pay attention because sometimes it's really close and it's like exactly lethal or things like that. And, maybe you just attacked with one too many creatures. And especially because like the harmonizer has warp and requires landfall, that like if it's not lethal on that turn, maybe they just don't have a land drop next turn. Maybe they can't warp it and get the same amount of landfall triggers. Maybe they've used their fetch lands already. So like sometimes it's not always even like, oh, it didn't matter. Like sometimes it matters a lot because it's like their one shot to kill you.
Yeah.
And yeah, a good example too is Matt Nass played against the mono green landfall player in top 8. I'm sorry. Oh, his name was also Matt. I'm remembering now. Yes, Matthew and Matt. This is a side note. It's really funny. His last name was Stefan's son, but spelled exactly as if he was like the son of the other player in top 8, Stefan. So people were saying that Stefan and his son top 8'd the tournament, which was really funny.
Nice.
But the one of the games Matt Nass lost, he did win. That was his quarterfinals match, I believe. So he won that match. He tapped out to like get to Nature's Rhythm for Gearhulk and set himself up for next turn when he had a road in hands, but he tapped out instead of playing it kind of slower, or maybe, Nature's Rhythming for something smaller and leaving up a road. And his opponent had Bossing Say, Mightform Harmonizer, 2/2 Forest, and a Surak. No cards in hand. And the amount of mana he had was 5. So he had like 3 lands, Bossing Say, and another 2/2 Earthbent land. And, I think at first it's like very obvious Matt would be dead to a fetch land. At 12 there. And like he tapped everything to Nature's Rhythm out the Gearhulk. So his only blocker is the 4/4 first strike, which also sounds, really safe to have a 4/4 first strike. His opponent draws Bushwhack and finds the nice line. I'm glad he found it because I, watching live, I had saw it. It was to use Bossing Say on your already 2/2 lands. That'll be your only untapped land left. It's a 4/4. Then you tap it to fight with the Gearhulk, which will clear it, and your land will come back and trigger landfall, and you double the power of either Surak or the Harmonizer and attack for exactly 12.
Wow.
But Matt had mentioned in the interview after that match, that he thought he was dead to a fetch land or Bushwhack. But actually, if his opponent just draws a land, he can harmonize onto the 2/2, make it a 4/4, play basic forest, double it to an 8/4, attack with an 8/4 and 2 4/4s. Matt's at 12. He can't take 8. He blocks the 4/4 lands, but his Gearhulk has first strike, kills it, and then the guy just gets to double the power anyways. So he believes it was totally wrong to tap out after realizing he was just dead to forest.
Yeah, totally.
And that's the type of, I guess, example of like that, these games are kind of hard because that's not obvious.
Yeah. Well, certainly like, Magic's hard and all that. And when you're watching at home, couch quarterback or whatever you want to call it, you sometimes can see things more easy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess also to kind of
heat of it,
to add to that point, the Landfall deck is one of my favorite decks I've played in a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm pretty good at spotting those lethals and those things. But in my mind, it's more just like so many of my turns are really simple and scripted that I'm kind of planning ahead, right? And I think that's what helps me. Is sometimes I draw Harmonizer and I've already calculated what I could do with Harmonizer because the turn before I just like I'm going to tap out for Ice Till Explorer or maybe that's too obvious, but I'm just going to like tap out for Esper Origins Flashback and that, resolve that trigger, and I'm looking for spells, and that's all that matters. And then my opponent plays their turn, and what else am I going to think about,
Yeah. I guess when you're playing a deck that's so proactive, one thing that's nice about it is you're able to, well, I mean, anytime you play a deck, you're going to be considering the future, but it's going to come to fruition more often because it's not like your plan's going to change much depending on what it does, or not as much.
There's also like some really tough sequencing with that deck that, I think you get used to as you play it a lot, but it's like, what order do I play my cheap spells and lands to start the game, and what lands do I want to spend onto? Those are really tough questions.
Yeah.
But I think I
thought those are pretty tricky.
I think that that's the type of stuff that is tricky when you're new to the deck and not that different from game to game. Those questions that get asked a lot in the first 3 turns as landfall what you'll learn is like maybe it's not the same every game, but it's the same every matchup or things like that,
Like you can start to shortcut because you realize that you're coming to the same conclusion.
Yeah, or
Oh,
there's tricky things you can do too. If your hand has, this one was actually in a lecture to my team, which I thought was cool. Not by me, by Collins Mullen, which is cool. Like you have 2 forests and Chocobo and Meltshredder's Resolve, among other cards in your hand, and you're against Blue-Red Prowess and you're on the play. Like, if you go Forest Chocobo, your opponent, if they have both Burst Lightning and Storm Chaser's talent, are going to, like, kill your Chocobo.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, if you just don't play it, then they're probably just going to play, like, Storm Chaser's talent, and you'll get to have a 1/4. And it's like a huge, like, that's just going to change the 1/4 that kills your otter, and like the whole game is different, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's like kind of a luxury of the Ninefall deck, because that hand that I'm talking about might not have any other cheap cards at all. It might just be like expensive, clunky cards and lands.
Mm-hmm.
So like you're only costing yourself 1 damage waiting on the Chocobo.
Yeah. Yeah, that came up a lot. I found that, when I was playing the deck over the weekend, there's a lot of things I had to learn and think about, and sequencing of when you have hands with elf versus when you don't, and when to play your fetch lands, because having a lot of tap lands with that deck is pretty interesting. Tap lands are fetch lands specifically too, because they power up your guys still. If you don't fetch them, or I thought it was an interesting decision, like when you because you do end up earthbending on your fetch lands a lot. It's a pretty good play.
Yep. And then you have to decide if you're actually going to crack the end of turn,
or if you're going to block with it, or you want to crack
or
it
attack
now.
even sometimes.
Attack. Yeah, that's all pretty interesting. So it is an interesting deck. I just wonder if maybe it's actually adding a lot of complexity, which is something you wouldn't expect from a mono green deck. But I guess
yeah, it's not.
Because it's the landfall.
Like, it reminds me a lot of like Hardened Scales, but not quite as hard.
It's
maybe,
just like a
but just
different, different way.
Yeah.